Everyone, it is week 5 in Rhetoric 6620, and this brief video is just going to kind of give you a orientation to the readings of this week. And I got a couple tips and suggestions for the reading that you'll do in week 5. So we're learning in week 5 about two more recent develops in writing assessment. One is contract grading, and the second is ungrading. And ungrading is only more recently been a topic of conversation amongst scholars in the field of writing assessment. Contract grading, however, that's been around for a good while. So you're going to read about those two assessment practices. So a little bit more about those two categories of things that you'll read this week. Let's talk first about the ungrading materials. Two of the texts that you'll come into contact with this week will they won't be specifically about writing assessment. They are Jesse Stommel's appearance on the Teaching in Higher Ed podcast, and if you're not familiar with that podcast, it's a really helpful and kind of positive podcast about teaching across the disciplines at the college level. I would argue that a lot of the content is also applicable to folks at the high school level. So take a look at it. They've done a lot of recent issues on AI, recent podcast episodes have focused on AI. So, Jesse Stommel's appearance, I think he's a historian. I know he's in the social sciences, so he's not a writing studies person, but he is talking about a topic in a pretty accessible way that folks in the field of writing assessment have picked up in recent years. The second piece that's not specifically from the field of writing assessment, this is more folks that deal with assessment at large when it comes to higher education, is Susan Blum's Why Ungrade, Why Grade? And it's her introduction to a book that she edited called Ungrading, Why Rating Students Undermines Learning and What to Do Instead. So you're going to be reading the introduction to that book. And I also linked to that book, not to the entire contents, but to the table of contents in the web page on the publisher's website for that book, Ungrading. So you'll be reading her introduction, kind of sets up the why to ungrading. We then get into an article that is in the field of writing assessment, folks that are in composition studies that are trying to understand how they might be able to do ungrading in composition studies. So to help you out a little bit with that article, it's Austin Bailey and Caroline Wilkinson's article entitled Ungrading the Composition Classroom, Affect, Metacognition, and Qualitative Learning. So this article is, if you're not familiar with reading scientific articles or articles in the social sciences, this is an article that is definitely in that vein. It's what we would call an IMRAD paper, Introduction, Methods, Results, Analysis, Discussion. So you definitely don't need to read closely everything in that article to get a sense of what it's trying to get across. They did a study at an institution. They either surveyed or interviewed students, and they'll tell you a little bit about that, but there's an introduction section and there's a literature review that's a part of that introduction section. You can maybe skim the literature review. You don't need to read it super closely. They talk about their methodology. You might read that a little bit to get a sense of the kind of study and this kind of research that they did, but where you really want to pay attention is in the results and the discussion that they have of those results in their conclusion section. So it's really the last 4 or 5 pages where the real meat of what they're trying to get across is communicated. So there's a lot of here that's like, we did our homework, we're asking a good research question based on all the other research that's come before us. We've done our due diligence. Here's how we went about doing our study. Here's what we found. So IMRAD. So you don't need to read everything super closely. I also teach our research methods course in the program, and I think that this is a good example of the variety of research methods that we use in the discipline. So, we're not literary scholars. You'll find a lot of articles. They're in APA. Most of my publications, they've been written in APA. So it's a good introduction to the different kinds of research that we do in our discipline. Let's move on to talk about the contract grading text that you'll read this week. One is Peter Elbow and Jane Danielowicz's A Unilateral Grading Contract to Improve Learning and Teaching. Peter Elbow is a very well-respected figure in writing studies. He wrote a book in the 1960s called Writing Without Teachers, super influential. He is a big proponent of journaling and having students write for themselves. He really would like teachers to get out of the way as much as possible and to just let student writers just write. But he also, later in his career, he got very interested in assessment, and he wanted to propose different assessment methods that, again, try to get teachers out of the way. Not that they didn't have a role in the classroom. He just wanted student writing to take more of a foreground and it be less about what teachers want and more about what students wanted to communicate. So he wanted assessment processes that would kind of do that. And one thing that he advocated for pretty early on was contract grading. And this publication with Jane Danielowicz is one of the early attempts to articulate this is what contract grading can look like. This is what we could do. So that piece it's pretty influential. Sal Inouye, you're already familiar with him. His book, Labor-Based Grading Contracts, published in 2017 or 2018, super influential, really kind of kicked off a huge wave of folks thinking about grade contracts. And then there's responses back and forth about how effective they are. In the supplemental resources for this week, you'll have additional things about grade contracts. People arguing that, they're not great for our students and other folks. And you'll actually read for one of the other articles that we'll read this week about grade contracts. They suggest, doing it the same way Sal Inouye didn't work for us, but we did do this research and we do think it has some benefits if we do it in this way. So, a lot of conversation in writing assessment has been about grade contracts and the role that they play in a classroom. So you have his appendix from that book, and it's the grade contract that he used when he taught at the University of Washington at Tacoma. So you have the contract language, and it's written for students, so it might be a little different. And there's not much kind of setup to it. It's just like, here's the contract that I've used. So just know that going into that you're reading somebody's grade contract. I've also taught using grade contracts. If you want to take a look at another example of what they might look like, I'd be happy to share that with you. Go ahead and reach out to me. The last piece that we'll take a look at when it comes to contract grading, and this is going to be like the Bailey and Wilkinson piece. It's Gita Dasbender, Nate Mickelson, and Leah Souffrance, contract grading and the development of an efficacious writerly habitu. That piece is also kind of the IMRAD style. They also did a study about contract grading, about self-efficacy, and the role contract grading had on students' self-efficacy. So it's a tougher read, but keep in mind they are doing that introduction, kind of a lit review. Here are our methods. Here's what we learned. So kind of key in and focus in on the stuff that they learned and think about how that might be applicable, either to your project or to what you want to write about this week. In the supplemental resources, there is a piece in there that's written. And I thought about including it for this week, but this is a class about college level writing assessment, but there is a piece in there about using contract grading at the high school level, not for CCP or dual enrollment, concurrent enrollment. It's for, in a high school English class. How do you use contract grading, or how did this educator go about using contract grading? You might, give that a look. It might be an interesting read for some folks. So that's what we're doing this week. I just want to give you guys a little bit of a heads up. There's two, what I think are tougher readings. That's Bailey and Wilkinson and Dasbender, Mickelson, and Souffrance pieces. The others, I think that you'll be just fine. The others, they show a little bit more of our social sciences approach in the discipline, and they might be a little tougher to read. But hopefully I've given you a little bit of some tips and how to approach them. So that's it this week. I think I'll mention it in the announcement about week 5. I'll be taking a little bit of time off at the beginning of the week so I won't be returning the week 4 homework super quickly. I apologize for that. And when I return, I'll be reading those part 1 of your final project, that proposal that you put together. So I'm looking forward to taking a look at those. All right, that's it. Hope you all are doing well, and I'll talk to you all soon. Bye.